This morning we rise to remember the darkest day in history, when sinful, prideful humanity killed the most beautiful man to ever live, Jesus. The author of Hebrews in the Bible describes the scene in a powerful and awe-inspiring way. In Hebrews 12, verse 2, it starts off by saying this: "For the joy set before him." It's a strange and sobering phrase that describes this man's life. It would be a phrase more appropriately spoken at times like these, like, "For the joy set before her, the graduate threw her cap in the air and hugged her fellow classmate," or "For the joy set before them, the couple dashed through the church doors past the honeymoon car," or "For the joy set before him, the prisoner shook the hand of the guard as he walked out of the prison yard," or "For the joy set before them, the soldiers embraced and shouted as the peace treaty was signed," or more personally, "For the joy set before Sean and Laura, they wept with joy at the birth of their children." But for Jesus, it was a phrase that was followed by these words: He endured the cross. The joy set before him was not the finishing of a task or a trial or the celebration of a victory past or a war ceased. The joy was seen through the cross that was to come. The cross. The emblem of suffering and shame, as the old hymn sings. When Jesus saw the cross, he looked through the jeers and insults of the religious leaders. He looked through the whipping torture and his flesh and body being ripped apart at the hands of Roman guards. He looked through the mocking crown of thorns jammed on his head. He looked through the rejection at the hands of the crowd who chose a criminal to free instead of him. He looked through the long, grueling walk, through the crowded onlookers and up the hill to Golgotha. He looked through the piercing nails, the slicing sword, and the asphyxiating trauma on the cross. He looked even through the steely, resolved eyes of his Father, who didn't rescue him. Jesus looked through this cross and his subsequent death to the joy set before him. He endured, he held on, he persevered, he resolutely marched forward for the joy set before him. And what was that joy? I believe it was you. I believe it was me. He saw you lost and dying in your sin, hopeless, confused, afraid, and most of all, separated from him and in bondage to sin and death. The joy set before Jesus on this day in history was worth the cross, worth the suffering, worth his own death that he had to pay. For the joy set before him, he wasn't on the other side of pain, on the other side of trial and suffering or shame. He was staring it in the face, and he was taking it all for the joy before him. You. Today, let the sober reality that we killed Jesus, the Son of God, be turned to joy. Be turned to thanksgiving, because that is how he saw the cross even before he carried it, even before he died on it. It was the door for salvation, the door for forgiveness and healing. It was the beginning of hope for a hopeless world. Today I encourage you to bow in and worship before Jesus, to give him thanks for what he endured for you. But also I encourage you to allow your hearts to be filled with joy. Today we can celebrate Jesus in the fact that he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. If you've never received his love, forgiveness, his life that he secured for you on the cross, I ask you to open up your life to him today and receive it. And you, along with hundreds and millions of people who have received his love, will join together in one eternal song of praise as we are filled with the joy set before us, a victorious risen Savior, Jesus, who has invited us into his glorious presence and his family forever.